Solomon Grant was 39 years old when his wife walked past him in their living room, said nothing to the man on their couch, and went upstairs to pack his bags. He was on the phone. He stayed on the phone. Angela had been building to this moment for weeks. He had felt it the way you feel a weather system coming before the temperature actually drops, in the small changes of pressure that a man who pays attention cannot miss. She had rehearsed what she planned to say. She had made decisions about furniture and accounts, and what stories she would tell her friends about why the marriage had ended. She had decided that Solomon Grant, with his quiet manner and his modest office and his habit of disappearing into phone calls she never asked about, was a man she had outgrown. What she had not decided, because she did not know to decide it, was what to do with the fact that the call he was on when she pulled the first suitcase from the closet shelf was a closing call with a pension fund acquisition team in New York, and the deal being finalized in real time while she folded his shirts 3 rooms away, was worth $400 million. He heard the suitcase wheels on the hardwood floor above him. He did not move. He did not raise his voice. He listened to the attorney on the other end confirm the wire transfer sequence, and he confirmed it back, and he initialed the final document on his laptop screen. And when the lead partner said congratulations, Solomon said thank you. Then he hung up. He set the phone on the coffee table. He looked at the ceiling for exactly 1 moment. Then he went upstairs to see what Angela had decided he was worth. She had no idea she was about to find out. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning of the day everything changed had started the way most of Solomon's mornings started in the old house on Cascade Road. Early, quiet, and already working. He had built the wraparound porch on the back of that house himself, salvaged pine boards from a demolition site in East Point, sanded them on weekends over 3 months until they were smooth enough to walk barefoot on in the summer. He sat on it most mornings with his coffee and his deal notes, watching the light come up over the privacy fence and listening to Atlanta wake itself up in the distance, the freeway hum, the first birds, the sound of the neighborhood settling into a new day. He worked in commercial real estate development. That was what he told people when they asked, and it was true. And it was also the kind of answer that satisfied people quickly and moved the conversation elsewhere, which was exactly what he needed it to do. His office was in a converted warehouse in West Midtown. 3 rooms, 6 employees, no lobby worth mentioning. His business cards said Grant Capital Group and gave a phone number and nothing else. He drove a clean but unremarkable Audi. He did not attend industry events unless a deal required it. He did not give interviews. His grandmother, May, had raised him in a 2-bedroom apartment in Vine City after his mother passed when Solomon was 9. And she had told him once, while she was pressing his school pants the night before a class presentation, that the man who needed to announce himself had already decided he wasn't enough. She said it without looking up from the ironing board. He had carried it for 30 years. May had passed 18 months ago. He had covered her final expenses and her burial from a personal account Angela had never seen, to an entity she had never known to ask about. He had met Angela 7 years ago at a fundraiser for a Westside Atlanta community development organization. She was in brand marketing then, confident and warm and articulate about what she wanted, which he had found, at 32, genuinely refreshing. They were married 14 months later in a small ceremony that her mother described afterward as tasteful, and that Solomon remembered mostly for the look on May's face when he said his vows. A look that was proud and careful at the same time. The way an engineer's face looks when a structure goes up correctly but the ground beneath it is not yet fully known. For 4 years the marriage had been real. For the last 2, it had been something Angela was maintaining while she decided where she was actually going. The shift had a name. Derek, a commercial architect Angela had met through a client engagement. Presentable, vocal about his accomplishments, the kind of man who described himself as visionary in professional settings and expected no one to challenge it. Solomon had encountered him once at an industry mixer, shaken his hand, assessed him in 30 seconds, and filed the assessment where he filed everything that mattered. That was 8 months ago. Since then, he had noticed the things you notice when you are trained to read variants in systems, the changed phone lock code, the dinner reservations that appeared on their shared calendar and then disappeared before he could confirm them, the particular quality of distraction she carried home on certain evenings that had nothing to do with work fatigue and everything to do with a life she was running parallel to this one. He said nothing. He simply continued to work. The call he had been building toward for 18 months was scheduled for that afternoon at 2 o'clock. The pension fund's acquisition team in New York, $400 million in commercial real estate, assembled property by property, relationship by relationship, across 6 years of quiet accumulation that had never once appeared on a joint financial statement. His assistant sent him a confirmation at 8:47 that morning. All parties confirmed. Documents staged. We're ready. He replied with 2 words. So am I. He had known for certain for 6 weeks. Before that, it had been the weight of accumulating variance, the kind of data pattern that a man in his position recognized as signal rather than noise, but could not yet call evidence. He was careful about the distinction. Evidence was what you acted on. Everything else was information you held until the picture completed itself. The evening that completed the picture was a Thursday in late September. Angela had come home from what she described as a client dinner and gone straight to the upstairs bathroom. Her phone had stayed on the kitchen counter face up, which was itself a variance. She had been keeping it face down or in her pocket for months. He was standing at the kitchen island with a glass of water when the screen lit with a message preview before he had time to look away. He read it in the 2 seconds it was visible. He set his glass down. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. He did not pick up her phone. He did not need to. The preview had contained enough. A specific reference to a specific evening, a specific address, a tone of familiarity that had no professional explanation. He went to his home office and opened his laptop and did what he always did when a variable required documentation. He wrote down exactly what he had seen, with the time and date in a file he labeled simply AG. Then he opened a second tab and returned to the closing documents for the pension fund deal. Because the deal did not stop moving, because his personal life had confirmed what he had already suspected, and because May had taught him that you did not let the left hand's trouble still the right hand's work. Over the following 4 weeks, he built the file. Not through surveillance, through attention, the same quality of attention he brought to every acquisition, patient, systematic, focused on the pattern rather than any single data point. Angela traveled twice for work during those weeks. He cross-referenced her travel against her company's public event calendar. One of the 2 trips had no corresponding company event. The hotel charges on the joint card, which he had apparently forgotten he could still access, showed a check-in at a boutique property in Savannah on a Thursday night when she had told him she was in Tampa for a brand summit. He documented it. He printed the statement. He added it to the file. He was not angry. He was precise. Anger clouded the work, and the work was what mattered now. He contacted his attorney, a woman named Renata Osei, who had offices in Buckhead and who had been structuring his real estate entities for 5 years, and told her to begin preparing a divorce filing. He told her to ensure the filing would be timed in relation to the pension fund closing in a manner that protected the transaction from any claim of marital asset commingling. Renata was quiet for a moment and then said she had been expecting this call longer than he might think. He asked what she meant. She said, "You have been structuring everything in your personal portfolio through premarital entities for 6 years, Solomon. A man who does that either has a very good tax attorney or a very clear understanding of his marriage. I assumed it was both." She told him the preliminary filing would be ready within 2 weeks. He thanked her and returned to the closing document on his screen. The deal was 48 hours from completion. He had been building it for 18 months, 6 commercial properties across Atlanta, Charlotte, and Nashville, assembled through a holding structure that predated the marriage by 4 years, acquired through entities that appeared in no joint financial disclosure because they had never needed to. The pension fund had come through a relationship built at a conference in 2019. He had spent a year and a half converting that relationship into a transaction. He had not mentioned it to Angela because he did not mention most of his work to Angela, and because this deal in particular was the kind of thing that changed the shape of a life, and he had already decided whose life it would change. He opened a new folder on his laptop. He named it After. Renata's office kept itself colder than most, which Solomon had always taken as a signal that she did her best thinking at a temperature that discouraged lingering. She reviewed the AG file in 12 minutes, set it down, and said she documented herself fairly thoroughly. He said, "People do when they think they're not being watched." The Savannah hotel record is useful. The text preview establishes timeline context. She slid 2 documents across the table. The filing is ready. Walk through the asset protection sequence with me first. The sequence was clean. Grant Capital Group and its 4 subsidiary entities were all incorporated prior to the marriage and had never accepted marital funds as operating capital. The real estate portfolio had been assembled entirely through entity debt and premarital retained earnings. There was no commingling because Solomon had been careful from the beginning to keep the two lives financially separate, not out of distrust in the early years, but out of the builder's habit of keeping structures sound. The pension fund wire will land in the Grant Capital operating account, Renata said. That account has no connection to any jointly held asset. There is no basis for a marital claim on the proceeds. She produced a third document, a forensic accounting summary covering 18 months of joint account activity. The Savannah Hotel had been charged to the joint card, so had 4 other trips that did not correspond to verifiable work events. Restaurant charges, a piece of jewelry purchased in Virginia Highland that Angela had never worn in Solomon's presence. The total came to $22,400. It's clean, Renata said, and it's enough. Solomon said that was fine. He had never been interested in maximum extraction. He was interested in a clean exit with no contested ground behind it. Renata said, "That is the most sensible instinct I have heard in this office in a long time." He drove to his Uncle Jerome's house in College Park that Saturday. His father's older brother, a retired civil engineer who had spent 30 years with the Atlanta Public Works Department and who had never once in Solomon's memory offered an opinion unless it was asked for, and never once given one that wasn't worth the wait. Jerome was 64 and poured 2 glasses of sweet tea before Solomon had settled into the backyard chair, and they sat in the space Jerome maintained with the same precision he had brought to every infrastructure project. Every edge trimmed, nothing accidental. Solomon told him the full situation. Jerome listened without interrupting. When Solomon finished, Jerome looked at his glass for a moment and said, "You know what the problem with a foundation that shifts is." Solomon asked what. "It doesn't announce itself," Jerome said. "It just moves, quiet and slow, until the structure above it tells you what's been happening underneath." He looked at his nephew steadily. "You built on shifting ground. That's not a moral failure. That's a site assessment error. You correct it by surveying the damage, stabilizing what can be stabilized, and building the next thing on ground you've actually tested." He reached into the pocket of his work shirt and produced a folded newsletter printout. Grant Capital Group cited in Southeast's top commercial transactions of the quarter, and set it on the table without ceremony. "Been showing that at church for 4 months, Jerome said. Solomon drove home with that in his chest like something load-bearing. The following Wednesday, he came home to find Angela already there. She was in the kitchen with a glass of wine and the particular stillness of someone who had made a decision and was waiting for the moment to execute it. He could see it in the set of her shoulders. He recognized it the way he recognized a negotiating counterpart who had already chosen their walkaway position before the meeting began. He set his bag down. He went to his office and opened the closing documents for final review. She appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later and said she thought they needed to talk. He said, "Give me until tomorrow. I have something to finish." She looked at him with an expression recalibrating in real time, trying to locate the version of this conversation she had rehearsed and finding the moment slightly off script. She said okay and went back to the kitchen. He worked until midnight. He sent the final review documents to Renata and to the pension fund's legal team. He confirmed the 2 o'clock call for the following afternoon. He went to bed in the same house as a woman who had already decided he was finished. He slept without difficulty, the way a man sleeps when every piece of work that can be done has been done. Some things could not be rushed. Others could not be stopped. The closing call started at 2 o'clock and ran for 41 minutes. Solomon was on the couch in the living room with his laptop open and his phone against his ear, and the particular quality of stillness he brought to consequential moments. Weight distributed evenly, voice level, nothing in his posture suggesting this call was any different from the calls he made every working day of his life. Angela came home at 2:17. She set her bag down in the hallway. She looked at him on the couch and said nothing, and went upstairs. He heard the closet door open. He heard the suitcase come down from the shelf, the large one, the one they had bought together for a trip to Portugal 3 years ago, which had been good and now existed in service of something else. He heard the dresser drawer open. He did not move, On the phone, the pension fund's lead attorney was walking through the wire sequence. The first tranche was $240 million. The second tranche, contingent on a 30-day title confirmation, was $160 million. Total consideration, $400 million, to be held in the Grant Capital operating account, registered to an entity that predated this marriage by 4 years and was about to outlast it by decades. He confirmed the first tranche. Upstairs, the sound of folded shirts being placed in a suitcase. Methodical. Decided. He confirmed the second tranche. Upstairs, the sound of shoes being set along the suitcase edge. The lead partner said, "Congratulations, Mr. Grant. This is a significant transaction, and we look forward to a long relationship." Solomon said, "Thank you. I appreciate that, and we will be in touch." He ended the call. He set the phone on the coffee table. He looked at the ceiling for one moment. Then he went upstairs. Angela was at the dresser, her back to the door, pulling the last of his folded undershirts into a neat stack. The large suitcase was on the bed, packed with precision, organized by category, which he had always found efficient and now found almost admirable in its commitment to the performance. His shoes were lined along the suitcase edge. His hanging clothes were laid across the top beneath a dry cleaning bag. She heard him in the doorway and turned. She said, "I think we both know this isn't working." He said, "I know." She looked slightly surprised by that. She had prepared for resistance. He walked to the desk in the corner of the bedroom. Solid oak, 3 drawers, a desk he had kept in every home he had lived in since graduate school, and he opened the bottom drawer and removed a folder. He set it on the dresser between them. She looked at it. She did not reach for it. He said, "Renata filed this morning. You'll hear from her office by end of day." He paused. "The folder is for your attorney. It's the full financial disclosure. All of it, not the summary previously requested. The complete picture. I wanted you to have it before the formal process, so there were no surprises." She looked at the folder for a moment, then she said, "What am I looking at?" He said, "What I actually built." He watched her eyes move across the first page, the Grant Capital Group Holdings summary, the 6 commercial properties, the valuation figures, the transaction history going back to before they had ever met. He watched her turn to the second page, which was the closing confirmation from that afternoon. He watched her expression do the thing expressions do when a person realizes the room they thought they were standing in is a different room entirely. She said, "This is from today." He said, "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, then something shifted in her posture, or reaching for familiar ground. And she said, "Solomon, I think we've both made mistakes. If we talked to someone, if we took some time." He said, "The Savannah Hotel is on page 3. She closed the folder. He said quietly, "I'm not angry with you. I want you to understand that. I'm not standing here with anger. I'm standing here with a folder and a completed transaction and the understanding that we both deserve something more honest than what we've been doing in this house." He picked up his phone from the dresser. "The house is yours until the asset division is finalized. I'll be at the corporate apartment." He looked at the suitcase she had packed for him. He left it on the bed. He had a closet at the corporate apartment that had been stocked for 6 weeks. He walked to the doorway. He paused once with his back to her. He said, "I hope you find what you were actually looking for." Then he went downstairs, picked up his laptop, and walked out of the house on Cascade Road for the last time as the man who lived there. Behind him, the bedroom held its silence. He had built everything worth keeping. The rest had been inventory. 10 months later, Solomon was on the wraparound porch he had built, at a different house. He had found the property in Collier Hills, a craftsman bungalow from 1938 that had been poorly renovated in the 90s and not touched since. He had spent 4 months restoring it to what it was actually supposed to be, pulling the wrong era materials out himself on weekends, relaying the hardwood floors with reclaimed longleaf pine sourced from a dismantled cotton warehouse in Macon. He had built the wraparound porch from salvaged cedar, because that was the kind of thing he built, and he was not going to stop building it because someone had decided the previous one wasn't worth staying for. The pension fund transaction had closed without complication. Grant Capital Group had used a portion of the proceeds to seed a new acquisition fund, mid-market commercial properties in secondary southern cities, the kind of assets that institutional money overlooked and patient money found. He had brought Jerome on as a senior advisor, which Jerome had accepted with a handshake and a 3-minute speech about not needing a title. Renata had finalized the divorce 6 months prior. Angela had received the joint accounts, the shared vehicle, and a lump sum distribution from the marital assets, calculated correctly and without rounding in her favor. She had not challenged the Grant Capital Holdings because the premarital documentation was airtight and because her attorney had apparently advised her, after reviewing the folder, that a challenge was unlikely to succeed and likely to generate additional discovery that nobody on her side wanted generated. He had heard through a former mutual acquaintance that Derek had accepted a position at a firm in Houston. Solomon registered this the way he registered all concluded transactions: noted, filed, released. A woman named Jade had been attending the same community development planning meetings he went to monthly in the West End. An urban planner with the city of Atlanta, unhurried in her thinking and precise in her language, who had looked at his proposed mixed-use development sketch at the second meeting and asked him exactly the right question about pedestrian access, which was the question he had been waiting for someone to ask. They had coffee once. She brought a site map. He brought revised schematics. They agreed this was a reasonable beginning. He pressed his palm flat on the cedar railing he had set himself and looked out at the backyard. The raised beds he had framed the previous weekend, the Japanese maple newly planted along the back fence, a yard still becoming what it was going to be. He thought about Angela saying, "I think we both know this isn't working." And he thought about how right she had been about that and how completely wrong about the rest of it. He picked up his coffee. He watched the morning come in over the Atlanta rooftops, unhurried and certain. Some things were worth the patience to build right. He had always known how to build right. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.